Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's session, we'll be learning about the first chapter of Standard 11, that is, the living world. We see a huge number of living organisms around us. There are many animals that live in the wild, like the tiger, lion, deer, elephant, hippo, leopard, etc. Many animals are also found on the trees. They are called the arboreal animals, like the monkeys, snakes, squirrels, orangutans, and so on. If we think about aerial animals, we can think about the birds, bats, insects, etc. There are also various animals that live under the ground, like ants, rats, moles, earthworms, etc. Apart from these animals, there are also microorganisms that exist on the earth. Microorganisms are very tiny organisms that cannot be seen with the naked eye. So, we need a microscope to see them. There are various kinds of microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, protozoa, algae, and fungi. Apart from them, there are also various kinds of plants like the herbs, shrubs, trees. And how can we forget about ourselves? We, humans, also form a very important part of the living world. You can see various kinds of animals and plants in the picture. There are various kinds of organisms that are existing on the earth, or there is a huge variety of living organisms found on the earth, and that refers to biodiversity. Now, the question arises, how can we say that something is living? What is it that differentiates living organisms from something that is non-living? So in this chapter, we are going to discuss about the characteristics that define life. The first character that we are going to discuss is growth. Every living organism grows. And growth occurs by a process called cell division. Whenever there is division of the cell, growth occurs. In multicellular organisms, growth occurs by cell division. But imagine about unicellular organisms. They have a single cell. If that single cell is going to divide, what is going to happen? Is it going to become multicellular? No. So, when the single cell is dividing, reproduction is occurring. Growth as well as reproduction is taking place at the same time. So we can say that in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are inclusive events. But in case of multicellular organisms, they're completely different aspects. Plants and animals also grow differently. They have a different growth pattern. Plants grow continuously throughout their life. They grow in the meristematic regions. But the animals grow only up to a certain age. After that, growth stops. There are some objects, the non-living objects, that also seem to be growing, like sand mounds, boulders, and mountains. But in that case, growth is occurring from outside. It is due to deposition of some materials that leads to the growth of these non-living objects. But in case of living organisms, growth occurs from inside. It is because of the cell division that leads to growth in living organisms. Since there are some exceptions to this case, we can say that growth is not a defining feature of living organisms. Growth cannot define life. Now, the next character that we're going to discuss is reproduction. So, the production of new individuals is known as reproduction. And reproduction can be asexual, it can also be sexual. In case of asexual reproduction, only a single parent is needed. And most of the lower organisms, they reproduce asexually. For example, yeast and hydra, they reproduce by budding. Planaria, you can see planaria in the picture. It reproduces by regeneration. Okay. Spirogyra reproduces by fragmentation and so on. We already know that in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are completely same. We can consider them to be synonymous. Okay. But in higher organisms, they're completely different, and higher organisms, they reproduce sexually. That is, they require two parents for reproduction. But there are some exceptions to this case too. There are some organisms like the mules. A mule is the progeny of the horse and donkey. So a mule is completely sterile. It does not reproduce. Think about the worker bees in the hive. They are all sterile. Except the queen bee, all the other bees in the hive are sterile. The queen bee has the ability to lay eggs, whereas the other bees are completely sterile. But on that basis, can we say that the bees are non-living? No, we cannot, because they show other characteristics of life except reproduction. There are some human couples that are infertile. That may be due to any defect in their reproductive system. But can we consider them to be non-living? No, we cannot, because they show other characteristics of life. So even reproduction cannot be considered as a defining feature of life. Moving on to metabolism. There are many chemical reactions that are occurring inside our body. Some chemical reactions require energy and some chemical reactions produce energy. Now a sum total of all these kind of reactions is known as metabolism. And metabolism always occurs in the body of living organisms. If we think about chemical reactions occurring in the labs, they are living reactions, but we cannot consider that it is happening inside a living body. Okay, so we can say that metabolism is a defining feature of living organisms. The next character down the line is cellular organization. We already know that every living organism is composed of cells. The smallest unit of life is the cell. Okay, cell is the structural and the functional unit of life. And cells are only present in living organisms. A non-living object does not have cells. So there are various kinds of cells like the nerve cell, the bone cell, the muscle cell, and so on. They are of different shapes and sizes and they perform different functions. Okay, so we can say that cellular organization is a defining feature of living organisms. Moving on to consciousness. Now, consciousness is an ability of an organism to respond to the environment. Every living organism responds to the environment. Okay? Every living organism senses the environment and responds to it. How do we respond to our environment? It is with our sense organs. We have 5 sense organs and we respond to different kinds of stimuli in the environment. For example, our eyes helps us to detect light. Nose helps us to detect smell. The tongue helps us to detect any kind of taste. Okay. Skin helps us to detect touch, pain, pressure. Okay. And ears helps us to detect any kind of sound. So in the same way, plants and every other living organism, let's say animals or microbes, they all respond to the environment. Okay. So consciousness can be a defining feature of living organisms. Now humans have a tendency of self-consciousness. That means they are not only aware of the environment, but they are also aware of themselves. They also are aware of themselves. That means they bother about how they look, they bother about what people talk about them. So these are all coming under self consciousness. So humans are the only animals that are aware of themselves or that are self conscious. Thank you everyone for watching. If you understood the topic, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And do let me know if you have any doubts in the comment section below.